James Cartlidge.
Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Exeter. He spoke about a blueprint, and I've read that committee report. I'm still not convinced it absolutely nails down who would pay and how much, which is, of course, the toughest part of all in these decisions, but I respect the fact it is a very good proposal. I also noted the fact he referred once again, as did his front bench, to cuts in local government funding since 2010. And, you know, I hate to labour the point, and it is a political point, but we cannot ignore the fact of asking ourselves why those cuts were necessary and why they happened. The Labour motion today mentions this keyword sustainability, as in fact does the independent group amendment, the TIG amendment, as you might call it. It also has the word sustainability. But of course, the cause of our problem was unsustainability in the public finances and in the economy. The huge growth in private borrowing, mortgage borrowing, all kinds of borrowing, and of course public borrowing prior to the crash, public spending commitments based on unsustainable tax income from, for example, city bonuses, that was never going to be sustained. It was always going to end in a big crash, and guess what? It would always fall to us to have to step in and fix the problem. And Labour MPs may deny this, but we must remind ourselves, because I intervened on the Right Honourable Gentleman for Denton and Redditch and asked him if it was the case that the 2010 Labour manifesto protected local government. So as he didn't answer, let me remind the House what that manifesto said. It said, Labour believes we should protect frontline spending on childcare, schools, the NHS and policing, and reform our public services to put people in control. Note the absence of local government funding. It goes on to say, and this is the key line, we recognise that investing more in priority areas will mean cutting back in others. That's from that manifesto. In other words, if an area of spending was not protected, it would get a right old shellacking, which is what happened under us. We did the same thing. We had priority departments that we protected, but at a time of a very high deficit, if you protect some departments, which is perfectly justified, like the NHS as we did, others will take a disproportionate hit. That would have happened under them. And I honestly do not say that for political point scoring. It's to underline the simple reality that there is no parallel universe that could have existed where there would not have been a significant hit to the grant given from central government to local authorities after 2010. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Going back to trying to find solutions to the actual problem that we face, he mentioned the Select Committee, the Joint Select Committee report. Does he agree, as the Select Committee report suggests, that we do need a new funding stream and that the best way to achieve a sustainable solution is to work across party, as the Select Committee did, in order to come up with a solution? And even if they haven't got all of the detail yet, this is clearly the right way to achieve a sustainable settlement.
It's a very good point. I will be coming on to that. I just wanted to, because the reason I mention this, what is essentially a political point about Labour's manifesto, is because we have to get into our heads the idea that there is never going to be a time, ever again, when local authorities do not have to make difficult decisions and do not have to look for efficiencies and innovation. The idea that there is always going to be the cavalry that can come over the hill with a wave of the magic wand and summon up central government funding, which, by the way, doesn't grow on trees and also has to come out of taxpayers, is never going to happen. So colleagues are right to mention good examples of best practice innovation that they've had. In my constituency, I have 2 district councils, 2 wards of West Suffolk. West Suffolk is a newly merged council of St Edmundsbury district and Forest Heath, so they've made savings through that process. The Baber district is contained in its entirety within South Suffolk. Baber is not a merged district. There was a referendum as to whether Baber should merge with Mid Suffolk. Baber voted to remain independent from Mid Suffolk, but they merged their back office. And there have been huge efforts to achieve savings, achieve efficiencies. Baber have left their head office in Hadley, in my constituency, and are now actually based in Ipswich, outside the district, which has been unpopular, I have to say, but of course it's saved money, and they have set up a joint venture to renovate and restore their old headquarters and make it a commercial asset. The point is, these sorts of changes from district councils will always be required. At a county council level, Suffolk County Council has seen huge innovation, as my honourable friend on the front bench who can't speak will know, in relation to social care. Councillor Becky Hopkinsberger, who has done great work as the Cabinet Member for Social Care in Suffolk. Of course, it's the use of technology there where they are saving money, driving down costs and improving care. For example, using sensory apps so that families can know whether their loved one, who is able to stay at home, is moving around, is mobile, etc., in short, that she is well. That she or he is well. These sorts of technological innovations can help to reduce the cost of care and to deliver better care. But in terms of the broader question that the honourable gentleman for North Norfolk raised about the sustainable funding of social care, I feel passionately about this issue. The biggest issue in British politics begins with B, and it is not Brexit by a long chalk. It is Beveridge. It is the welfare settlement that we have in this country, covering the whole of the state pension, the NHS, social care and every aspect of that contract that we all thought we entered into. But it's a system that is not remotely sustainable. If you look at the OBR's forecast just for NHS spending, 50 years from now, they estimate that we'll be spending the same again as we do in real terms on the NHS because of changing technology, demand and so on. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us. But on the specific point of paying for social care, I recently had a constituency surgery where an elderly lady came to see me. She had a husband with a very difficult condition and she wanted to know what support was available to her. She felt she was in that category of my constituents who are neither so poor that they receive lots of help or are wealthy enough to afford to fund a good lifestyle. And I said to her, what about your house? Do you have housing assets? And she said, yes, we have a house worth about 700,000 with no mortgage. But in her eyes, she has no money. And I think this is going to always be the most controversial point, as we discovered to our cost at the last general election, the issue of housing and assets. The asset in residential housing of those aged over 65 is worth between £1 and £1.4 trillion, depending on which estimate you look at. That's a staggering sum. And we have to accept that at the core of this issue, the reason why it's so controversial is that those entering the workplace today will not have occupational pensions. They will not build up that level of housing equity. It's highly unlikely because we will not see that period of high house price inflation again. In my view, it's not sustainable. And so we're reaching a point where those paying into the system are seriously questioning whether they're going to get the same benefit as those who retire today. This intergenerational issue is no one's fault. No one designed it that way. In fact, the welfare system that I refer to, the Beveridge system, was built with the very best intentions for a post-war country. But the thing it needs, and I'll conclude with this key point, as my honourable friend for Lewis said, herself a nurse, and I greatly respect the expertise she brings to this, the thing we need is honesty. In this populist Trumpian era, the one thing that's going to work is if we're all open and transparent about the tough choices we're going to have to make. No one is going to get a free option. There is no free option. Every option available is going to cost. I happen to think that the best option will involve some use of housing equity, but perhaps with a choice to pay through an alternative method if you don't want to bind yourself into that. For those entering the working population, I think we should look at the success of auto-enrolment. How many people here have emails from constituents complaining about the rise in their pension contribution from their salary from auto-enrolment? I haven't had a single email because people believe it's a contribution that they will benefit from. It's not like the old pay-as-you-go system. And I think we could, for the young generation, link their social contributions through a premium, as suggested by the Select Committee, through that system. So it will be very difficult coming up with a solution on social care. It may take a consensus. I think it may take a future government with a large majority being pretty tough and disciplined. It will take one or the other. It won't take what we've got at the moment. But we can start, and we've got to be open and transparent about the fact there is no easy option, but there can be an option where we get much better care for the next generation.